during this pandemic? I will start with your personal experience. So, what was your viewing experience of cinema as an audience, as well as an film academician? So, how did it affect you?
So I think that's really an interesting question, because I'm in the process of thinking through that right now as we are speaking. Uh, a lot of the work that I'm doing right now focuses on that. Uh, I was for the first 3.5 odd months of the pandemic, I was living by myself. I was living alone,
Mm.
and my folks are back in Bombay. I was living in Pune, and uh, as time passed and I was alone, and I rarely stepped down, thanks to my privilege, which allowed me to order food online, order stuff online, which is a privilege that most don't have in this country. So I didn't really step down. So that sort of, uh, you know, really shifted the way in which I was sensing time and space, which I'm sure is something that happened with almost everybody,
Yeah.
those who had the privilege to stay at home.
Right.
And my phone became my everything. So it became the way that I was staying in touch with people who mattered. It became the way in which I was, I used to often just keep some kind of show running in the background while I cooked or while I worked, because I needed that human voice.
Mm.
And it's really funny how instructive the metaphors that we use sometimes are, because I'm saying, staying in touch with, the literal way in which I was staying in touch with people was by touching my screen,
Yeah.
was by touching my device.
Mm.
And while I was so starved of human contact, I began to realize that these screens which are around me are throwing me back into my body in new ways.
Mm.
They are reminding me of the concept of tactility in new ways, when all other kinds of touch I am deprived of.
Right.
So that's what started this chain of thinking for me about how and of course, this is really not the first time that anybody is thinking about this. A lot of theorists have spoken about the ways in which our bodies are connected to our screens and so on and so forth. But I feel like, because the uh, pandemic put me in a bubble, my relationship with the screens that I own became a lot more intense than
Right.
before.
Right. So you talked about how it affected your maybe in general lifestyle, right?
Mhm.
But if you talk specifically about cinema, like
Hmm.
how was your
Yeah.
cinema viewing experiences affected during this time?
So I work with audiences, and so I really don't have, a lot of us have some kind of uh, notions with which we approach the way in which we are supposed to watch cinema.
Hmm.
So it's very surprising to people when I say that I watch cinema on my phone.
Right.
It's almost heretical to say that I watch it on my phone while I'm lying down on the bed. Uh, so I think, in a way, because in a way, I saw this being normalized over these past 3 months. A lot of prescriptive norms, prescriptive notions that we have about how we are supposed to, about what our relationship with the cinema screen is supposed to be,
Hmm.
saw a change, right?
Right.
So I mean, I'm not going to go into the obvious bits कि obviously हम बाहर नहीं जा रहे हैं, obviously हम थिएटर में तो पिक्चर देखने जा नहीं रहे हैं, so फिल्में तो बंद हो नहीं रही हैं, so we are still finding a way to make films come to us.
Yeah.
And but what really changed, what I was seeing in amusement, this sounds vaguely superior, but what I was seeing in amusement is so many codes of behavior around the screen with regard to the cinema screen changed, I feel, in this time.
Right.
And suddenly I'm not saying it's not heretical, but just little less. It's a little less heretical now to say I watched a lot of new films on my phone.
Okay.
I now have movie on my phone. This part of this is also because I own an old laptop, and hence we are at this pass where I am talking to you by using my
Oh,
mobile phone.
yeah.
But uh, but something very intimate and interesting happened between me and the films that I was watching while I was watching them on mobile phone. And it sort of threw me back, now that you're saying it, it threw me back to something one one of my older respondents had said to me when I was doing audience surveys, where she said to me that uh, I prefer to use my phone when I'm watching with my headphones because then the whole world goes away.
Right.
It's just me and my phone, and I prefer it. It makes it more intimate. And then a second later, she said, "Oh my God, you're a film academic. Am I supposed to admit such a thing to you?"
Right.
Uh, but what's interesting over here is the implications that it has for filmmakers, right? I have cinema, especially since I teach theory to since I taught theory to students who were wanting to become filmmakers. We speak about how much you think about what goes in each frame, but what happens when that frame becomes your mobile screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And increasingly we are seeing that this is a possibility. So without going into conniptions over it, this is not how it was meant to be watched, without going crazy about it, what are ways in which then that we can start to reimagine the way we tell stories, so that they fit that screen, which has a certain intimacy of touch with audiences? That's a question I'm more and more becoming interested in.
Ask you about how it is different when we go to the theaters and the
Mhm.
experience, and now when we are not able to go to the theaters and the experience, like we are the experience has become more personalized in a way. Like you said that you can go into bed, take a blanket, and you know on any film and watch it. So how is it different?
So I'm always a little iffy about using the word personalized, because sometimes I feel like it makes it seem like the audience has way more agency than it does.
Okay.
Personalized, sure, but to a certain extent. Our choices are limited by a lot of different factors, but I'll not go there. Let me just address the question you're asking. Uh, so one of the key elements is that when we go to a theater, there is a certain notion of distance from the screen, which is ideal, right? Uh, an ideal distance from the screen, and that screen is large, huge. You are going there to be overwhelmed, right? You're going there, that darkness, that distance. And again, what I'm telling you is not something that I am coming up with. This is something that has already been said. I'm trying to condense this in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, but so the moment that we enter a theater, we are going in that to that large screen with that distance to be overwhelmed.
Right.
The screens in our lives now, whether they are laptop screens, whether they are television screens, whether they are mobile phones, they overwhelm us in a different way. They overwhelm us by their ubiquity, by the fact that they are always there around us, unlike a film screen, which you actually have to go to, you have to seek it out, and someone else is playing the start button. That start button is not in your control, right? uh, so the one of the most interesting implications for me here is, uh, what is this play of proximity and distance that happens on this large screen vis-a-vis a smaller screen which we own, uh, because and by proximity and distance, I mean both literal and metaphorical, right? While I'm talking to you, or while I keep a mobile phone near me and watch cinema, there is a much shorter distance between me and the screen and I. But when I go to watch a film in the theater, that distance is magnified. And so
Right.
uh, in a way, what's interesting is that the screen has come into our life in uh, a lot of guises and in a lot of different ways. And therefore, the difference to me is that difference of closeness. And this is not just a difference that I have felt personally. This is also a difference that I have felt in the people that I have spoken to, in the audience members that I have spoken to over the course of my study, uh,
Mhm.
which is that uh, there is a certain intimacy with a screen you own,
Mm.
or a screen your friend owns. When you have an ownership over a screen, versus when you are practically, when you're going to the cinema, you're renting that screen for a few hours.
Right.
So that I feel is the primary difference. That being said, I would say that uh, whether it is being overwhelmed, whether it is this feeling of intimacy, it is very important that we don't get deterministic, that one kind of screen is intimate and the other kind
Mm.
of screen is not. It's
No.
just very different, literally different textures of intimacy that we are dealing with here. Because this is a sort of tactile intimacy that I have with the screens in my home,
Mm.
versus it's a whole different kind of intimacy when I enter a theater and it's just, मैं और मेरी तन्हाई और वो screen.
Huh. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yes, the textures of intimacy and closeness and distance is
Mm.
what I feel are key in
Different.
defining the difference.
Right. You just mentioned how overwhelming it is to go to the theater and watch a
Hmm.
film. So there have been
Hmm.
these discussions about films that are made by Sanjay, Leela, Bhansali, or so-called
Hmm.
films made for the big screen. So,
Hmm.
what is your perspective about films that are supposed to be watched on big screen, and now that we are in a pandemic situation,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
what will be the future of it? Maybe what is your perspective about it? How should we see that?
I think there is always I'm always a little antsy about arguments which have to do with medium specificity. That
Hmm.
I have made this product. I mean, it's a little sad that we have to call it a product, but that's what
Right.
it is. I've made this product, and this is the only delivery channel for it. And you watch it the way I'm telling you to watch it. So I'm always a little, and that's why I. I'm very interested in the works of people who are pushing back against what cinema is in the first place,
Right.
right? So,
Hmm.
is it cinema? For instance, short films like we are watching right now, are they cinema? This that you're talking about, this aesthetic which focuses on grandness, this
Hmm.
aesthetic which focuses on requiring details in a frame. I'm really not sure of how of well the future of that aesthetic, especially since we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow because of how
Yeah.
the world is this how this year has been. But uh, with regard to films like that, without complicating what I'm trying to say too much, with regard to films like that translating on the smaller
Mobile screen.
screen,
Hmm.
I yeah, I, or even a laptop screen for that matter, I feel like different details will emerge. So while you are in a theater, right, that big thing is going to constantly play. You can't pause, you can't rewind, you can't go ahead.
Right.
But but when you watch that grand thing on a small screen, sure, but with the ability to pause, with the
Hmm.
ability to go back to a certain frame, with the ability to go forward to a certain frame, I also feel like these are all things which will add different kinds of layers of meaning that we gain from it. So
Right.
because finally now I'm able to pause and appreciate the beauty of a certain frame. So for my own reasons, I was watching Guzaarish today. It's funny you should bring up this particular filmmaker,
Yeah.
but uh, but the ability to pause on Aishwarya Rai's face at a certain point, the ability to pause on a certain frame and then take in the details, is something that these screens and the sort of agency that I have over these screens is giving me, which is
Right.
adding a different kind of appreciation of these frames, which are meant to be appreciated for their symmetry or for their whatever
Hmm.
XYZ reason.
Right. Right.
So, uh, yeah, I think it's important that we start, that filmmakers also start seeing it like this.
Right. So now that you have talked about the uh, the features of digital platform, uh, the
Hmm.
positive aspects that they provide you to pause or playback. So how it will
Hmm.
affect the making of content? How do you think? Like, how should filmmakers think about it?
I can, this is something that comes up in my classes quite a bit. Uh, but one thing that I feel like uh, this does is it makes you have to think through frames which you think will be up only for a split second.
Hmm.
So the thing is, this is just going to be up there for a split second. So let me think through this frame differently is not something that will work when it's going for the digital, because the beauty of this is, the beauty might be a little too, I might be romanticizing it a bit much, but the feature of this is that I am suddenly able to compress and dilate time of what I'm viewing in very complex ways. So what is a split second for the filmmaker might just be a frame that someone has paused on for 5, 6, 7 minutes.
Right.
Okay. Or might just be the frame that someone has paused on to take a call, and while their mind is wandering while they're on the call, they are looking at that frame. So this, I feel, is a, on the practical level, for younger filmmakers who are just getting their feet wet, this is a very important implication.
Hmm.
Apart from that, uh, I also feel that uh, this, the ability to go forward, back, pause, which is again something that has been theorized by a lot of people, by the way, and also log out altogether, right? So I can just stop and get out,
Right.
because uh, in my classes I always say that there is something called as the sunk cost fallacy, which keeps someone in the theater. So a
Hmm.
sunk cost fallacy basically means that I've invested X amount of money, so now let me see it through,
Right.
what we call पैसा वसूल करेंगे.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay.
Right.
तो बिकॉज हमने पैसा भरा है, हम इंटरवल के बाद भी कभी कभी रुक जाते हैं फिल्म देखना,
True.
क्योंकि मैंने पैसा भरा है. Even if you don't like the film, or the film is not looking promising,
Hmm.
but the sunk cost fallacy plays out very differently when we are talking about digital platforms.
Hmm.
So someone might just say, let me pause this because this is going nowhere, and let me go back and, and I'm seeing a lot of audience members say this. So uh, that we decided, I couldn't watch the entire series, or I couldn't watch the entire film, so I just decided, let me pause and go watch something else because it's right there. I mean,
Hmm.
so that's another thing that filmmakers are going to have to think through. How are they going to engage audiences?
Right.
And another thing is that is the autonomy of the start button for younger film, for audiences,
Autonomy
right?
of.
uh, the start button. Okay, I
Yeah.
can
Right.
press start. I have to press
Hmm.
start for that film to begin. Okay,
Right.
so what are you going to do to get me to press start?
Hmm.
Okay, what are you going to do to because there is no projectionist who's going to begin it. Okay, I have to, and because that, especially now, places like the short film market, in
Yeah.
that, what do I do to uh, get the audience to press start? This is also going to require filmmakers, younger filmmakers, to have a deeper knowledge of what are the algorithms which get audiences to press start. So what are the
Right.
algorithms which are going into recommending videos? What are the algorithms which are going into, so stuff like that. But primarily, I think it's the idea that uh, the notion of time is going to become extremely fluid, and so uh, there is going to have to be a different way in which filmmakers approach the concept of time
Right.
while they are
Right.
working on their movie.
Okay. Uh, so coming away from screen thing, I wanted to ask you, what genres did you explore more during this pandemic? Because according to my observation, I might be wrong, but there were so many
Hmm.
crime thrillers or dark horror content during this pandemic that I
Hmm.
explored personally. So, what was your
Hmm.
experience about it on OTT platforms?
So, so personally, I require a lot of mental preparation to watch dark things. So because it affects me very viscerally, so I need a lot of mental preparation, and I didn't have that bandwidth. So I was going in to watch absolutely random fluff, like I was not looking at deep dark content, or I was not looking at particularly meaningful content. But I think the way to actually gain insight from the question that you're asking me, what makes people choose certain genres at certain times, uh, is it is apart from obvious answers, like it's very individualistic, and people have preferences, and so on and so forth. uh, what I am seeing, what I also feel is increasingly we are beginning to ask if there are certain genres that these kind of platforms are more suited to than others. So therefore what's going to happen is it's going to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we have a, and the point is not even whether that medium is particularly good for that kind of content or not. That's a whole another conversation. What's interesting is that we are going to start making assumptions based on certain data that the that a particular medium will lend itself to a certain genre well. Often these assumptions are iffy. Overall, we operate on a certain understanding of what is going to work for a certain audience with a certain platform, beyond the actual realities of is this actually the case, or to what extent it is the case that a certain genre will work better on a certain platform for a certain audience. What is important is that it is these assumptions which drive the kind of content that is made. And so you start getting the same kind of content over and over and over again, because there is an assumption driving that engine, an assumption about audiences driving that engine. And this is not a new phenomenon, and this is certainly not a phenomenon that is limited to just streaming platforms. So but that's the larger thing that we are, and as we go as we begin to develop better understanding, of course in a country like India, it's important to understand where that uh, it's largely urban audiences which have access to these kind of platforms, and even in urban areas there is a huge problem of access, and that problem of access is complicated across different social divisions. So for instance, among the women that I interviewed, especially working class women, they don't have access to uh, cinema as easily as their male counterparts. Their male counterparts don't have access to cinema as easily as you and me. So there are, of course, many layers of access, issues of access, and so on here. And that's an important caveat to put out there. For a while, at least, we are going to, because in the absence of clean data, and in the absence of uh, studies which are trying to make sense of what is working and what is not working for audiences, uh, it's going to be these assumptions which drive the kind of content we get, and we are going to wind up watching the content we are getting, and so that's going to feed into the assumptions. So that's what I mean when I say that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We get a certain kind of content, we watch that content, so the feedback loop goes that this is what is working.
I was going to come to the feedback thing. You just pointed it out. So, due to digital platform, the interactivity part between the audience and the makers has changed.
Mhm.
uh, and it has changed in a way, like you have examples of trolling, or you have examples of hashtags getting famous, either to ban something or to make something famous, whatever it is, right? So there's this process of instant feedback through the audience, and eventually the kind of content that we see, or we see the repercussions of it on the content or the makers. So how do you look at this entire structure?
So repercussions, what kind of repercussions are you talking about here?
Repercussions as in, when a certain audience, a certain set of audience popularizes a hashtag, for example, for to ban certain
Okay,
film, right? So I'm
okay,
talking
okay.
about those repercussions. Maybe it might
Okay.
not be there in practical way, but it seems like there are some.
If we are talking about feedback, I think it's important to separate two interrelated phenomena here. Feedback on digital platforms about media
Hmm.
versus feedback about digital content, which are two different, which it's very important that we don't confuse the two.
Hmm.
uh, because technically, even if I go out there and watch a film, I can
Hmm.
still hashtag about it and tweet about
Yeah,
it
yeah,
and
of
give
course.
feedback in that form, right?
Right, right.
But uh, but on the other hand, if we are talking about the moment that a particular film goes digital, what are the possible feedback chains that get initiated immediately? Immediately is the is how many clicks you get, is
Hmm.
how many it's how many impressions have been formed, it's how many people have actually tried to open that and start watching it. uh, what I feel is that, uh, at least in the way, at least in what I have seen, is that ultimately, if people don't like it, people are going to stop watching it. And the feedback chain, whether it is something that I'm watching, whether it is something that has been designed for me to watch on my laptop, whether it's something I've watched on my laptop, on my screen, or a big screen outside, or on my television, uh, the feedback chains, the basic structure of the feedback chain does not, uh, for one individual, the basic structure of that feedback chain is not going to vary too much. So
Okay.
it's very important that we don't feel like digital, if we are watching something digitally, the feedback is going to be tremendous,
Okay.
because what are we talking about? We're talking about views, we are talking about likes, we are talking about, basically we are talking about metrics.
Hmm.
And I think beyond the actual metrics, which are anyway available for any kind of uh, media platform. So
Hmm.
I'm not sure about the politics of the feedback and how that plays into content differently.
Okay.
uh, at least how it's playing out on the ground among metropolitan audiences, in my experience that I have spoken.
Okay.
So yeah, but what is interesting, since you're asking me this question, what is interesting is that no matter where an audience member watches a film or what kind of film they are watching,
Hmm.
uh, they are always in touch with more than one screen, a lot
Hmm.
of them. So for instance, even if I'm watching a film on in the theater, I have my mobile phone on. And although it is considered, again, like I said, it's considered heretical to check your mobile phone when you are in the theater. But once you actually get talking to audience members, because I've had people first pushing back and saying, I never touch my phone when I'm at the theater. But
Hmm.
once you have respondents getting a little bit comfortable, they will tell you that they have Googled a term they have not understood,
Right.
uh, or they have immediately gone on Twitter and written about that film, or they've gone
Right.
on Instagram and posted a story about the fact that they're watching that film.
Hmm.
So, no matter where we are constantly in touch with multiple screens. Within this streaming world, this becomes very significant, especially because on my laptop, on one screen I open multiple tabs. So I have spoken to women who have watched Sacred Games, who have said that they had like 8 or 9 tabs open because they were not understanding a lot of the references in that show, and they were googling it right then and there.
Hmm.
So what I'm trying to say is that apart from looking at feedback in that general way, where I watched something and I decided what I felt about it, and I put that out into the ether.
Hmm.
I tweeted about it, I wrote about it, or I
Right.
hashtagged it, or whatever, which are like these really gross ways of looking at feedback. What
Hmm.
is happening is that there is a tremendous amount of internal feedback that is going on because we have multiple screens.
Hmm.
So it's like one screen is giving feedback to the other screen.
Right.
Okay, and each of these screens are sort of literally feeding back into that one screen through which that person is watching. that content. And a lot of this is made possible by the fact that they can pause. Okay. So I paused, for instance, uh, respondents have spoken to me about pausing at a point where there is a word they have not understood, Googled it, where there is
Hmm.
a term they have not understood and looking it up.
Right.
So what's more interesting to me is that this is not something that they will admit to you within the first 15 minutes of an interview.
Right. Right.
I mean, I think the ways in which, if we expand a bit the way in which we look at the concept of a feedback, then the question you have asked becomes particularly interesting.
So like you referred about the urban audiences earlier, so I was going to come to that, that there is this general perception that OTT platforms are very optimistic, sound very optimistic with respect to variety of content or inclusivity about content, right? But I saw this interview of Rajeev Masand, where he interviewed
Hmm.
actors who have become popular through streaming platforms. So there was Nasruddin Shah, Kay Menon, uh, Arshad Warsi. Geetanjali Kulkarni pointed out a different perspective where she said that I live in a village, I work in rural areas, so I don't
Hmm.
find uh, this perspective of OTT platforms being optimistic or very inclusive, very right. Because still there are so many people who do not have access, like you said, they don't have access to OTT platforms, or they don't have even access to mobile phones. So
Hmm.
so to generalize the to generalize the opinion into fact that the OTT platforms are giving opportunities to unknown faces and they are talking about a different content. So how do you look at this in all?
So, so I think it's important to understand that we have few theater much compared to the population of our country. The number of theaters we have is also really small. Okay,
True.
so when we speak about access, the issues are not just about OTT. The issues are also there when we are talking about the good old film, right? The Despite all that nostalgia associated with going to the theater, standing in the line, waiting for popcorn or not waiting for popcorn, depending, and sitting in the theater. So apart from all that, despite all that nostalgia associated with it, and despite how much we romanticize it,
Hmm.
हमारे पास theaters की कमी है. We don't have enough theaters to reach audiences. So this is not a problem that is unique to OTT. The problem of access.
Right.
Uh, that having been said, and so it's important to put this in perspective, that it's not like cinema itself has its tentacles in all parts of our country and those parts are somehow deprived of OTT. It's not like that.
Hmm.
That's one thing. And second thing is, see, I also feel that issues of access are extremely layered. Okay,
Hmm.
they are not just rural urban. They are not just rich poor. They are a lot more nuanced than this. And since my work is especially talking about gender, and uh, I can tell you that gender vastly complicates access to OTTs, even in really affluent homes as well. So therefore, I think it's very important that we don't fall into these, sort of iffy
Right.
binaries that
Right.
यहाँ पर access है, वहाँ पर access नहीं है.
Hmm. True.
In surprising, in really in the lives, in real, first of all, I have found OTT to be a presence in the lives of people which I had not anticipated, and
Hmm.
in the parts of their life which I had not anticipated. So
Right.
both happen. It's like
Hmm.
which part of your life has OTT. Like for instance, the work part of my life has OTT, right?
Hmm.
Versus maybe the leisure part of someone else's life has OTT. But
Right.
it's very interesting to me to see which crevices of our life that has a presence in, and it pops up in unexpected places and it is absent in really unexpected places.
Right.
So I mean, for instance, since you have been asking me about my preferences,
Hmm.
my mother is a PhD. Okay, she is a retired professor.
Hmm.
and she does not have access to a single streaming platform,
Okay.
not one.
Hmm.
Okay. uh, my father is an avid cinephile. He has access to no streaming platform.
Okay.
Okay. My father has two PhDs. So clearly there is not a problem of affluence here. But
Hmm.
streaming platforms are absent, and he will go to YouTube maybe to watch a film or two.
Right.
But not to a Netflix, or not uh, to an Amazon Prime, or to all these dozens of things which have mushroomed.
Right.
So I think and part of that problem is that my parents' generation is not confident with dealing with that technology. So you're right in the sense that it is very easy to slip into overstatements when we are talking about
Hmm.
uh, these platforms, and especially in a country that's as complex as ours. It's
Right.
very important that we are uh, more cautious when we make sweeping statements about
True.
the potency of a medium.
So I also wanted to talk about how it will affect the songs in our cinema. I am a
Mhm.
bit diverting from the audience point of view, but I'm
Yeah,
very
yeah.
interested in how the Bollywood songs might get affected due to the digital platforms, because there have been instances where you have a film like Bulbul, or
Mm.
many recent films who do not have any songs, and the Indian cinema is known for its song culture, right? So
Mm.
how do you see that, like how will it affect?
So, so uh, much has been already written, theorized about the space of the song in movies, particularly in popular cinema. Right. So I'm not going to go into that, into how, uh, but briefly, it is the idea that uh, a song is a fundamentally extractable part of the narrative,
Hmm.
meaning that it has its own marketing channels, it has its own distribution channels, there is an almost independent economy associated with songs. uh, and for a filmmaker, or for a series, or for uh, a, a production which wants or requires that economy, that space is always going to be there. So for instance, look at Bandish Bandits, right?
Right.
The soundtrack has become pretty huge in my understanding.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who are talking about uh, the songs in that series. Part of the reason why songs have, again, just a part of the whole reason, so
Right.
I will not boil it down to just this one factor, but part of the reason why songs have thrived is because they have their own parallel economy which feeds into the economy of the film.
Hmm.
So those songs will circulate independently, basically.
Right.
And it's that independent circulation which sort of feeds into the film. What's interesting now is that because of the fact that I can pause and screenshot and make memes, and I can, just extract a certain moment in cinema in different ways, different economies are now opened up,
Right.
especially when I'm talking about it digitally. So, uh, where will the film song go? What is the place of the film song is a much more complex debate, which is important and must be
Hmm.
had. And I don't think there is any clear answer to that, especially since it's an aesthetic that is already evolving, even when it comes to films that are getting made in theaters for uh, mainstream so-called audiences.
Hmm.
But I feel like what's interesting is that this particular parallel economy, which uh, films sort of thrived on through songs, a different kind of visual economy has opened up,
Hmm.
uh, which is, like I just said, through memes. New
Right.
subcultures are opening up. So I am actually more interested in seeing where that goes and how filmmakers are going to use that, because they've already started.
Right.
They have already started to cull out images which they think are like meme worthy, or images within their narratives that they think will catapult outside the film and feed into the film in different ways. So I'm actually interested in that, especially since there is a massive subculture around that online. the debate about where the song will go is not something that interests me as much as this. That
Okay.
how is this particular economy going to sort of substitute for what the song did in a certain way?
Huh. Right, right. So, since you're talking about how filmmakers should see this kind of digital platforms as an opportunity to like reproduce the content through memes or whatever, just right you said. So, in terms of filmmaking, how do you think OTT platforms give these young filmmakers an opportunity to create a content which we cannot in mainstream cinema due to its own reasons? Because you have censorship, because you have a different distribution strategy there. So, what are the
So
opportunities right
I feel like the moment there is an institution of some kind, there are going to be gatekeepers, and there are going to be gatekeeping mechanisms anyway. Uh, so that is whichever institution you might say. So the moment that, like for instance, Netflix as an institution, or or YouTube as an institution, the moment there is going to be a certain kind of gatekeeping that happens anyway. So I think what's interesting is uh, filmmakers who are able to understand the rubrics of those gates, who are able to understand sort of the mathematics of that gate, uh, are the ones who will do really well. Because there is no absence of gates. Since you have sat in my classes, I'm a relentless optimist. So,
now? Right.
so I think, but at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that those gates are going to exist. So I will certainly not say that uh, this is this massive wide open space and come on filmmakers, go out there. And
Right.
uh, so I mean that's certainly not the reality on the ground either. But what I do feel though is there is a certain, like I said, I keep coming back to proximity and distance. There is a certain mobility now to filmmaking, that which means that I can use a different, like the technology with which I'm making and distributing cinema is a lot more mobile,
Right.
and it's a lot closer to me than it was. So that is what is exciting for me, more than this idea that, oh my god, now suddenly there is no censorship, because
Right.
there is. Okay, there is censorship. It's just that it appears in different forms. Okay, for instance, and I don't know if we have time for this little anecdote, but I think I'm going to share it anyway with you.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, which is that we this notion that char gali bol diya to now there is no censor is is quite fallacious, because we still don't show a lot of things because we are afraid of how people are going to react, or of whose sentiments are going to get hurt in what way, and so on and so forth,
Right.
to the point that there is one of the women I was speaking to said to me that, and this is a woman who actually happens to be a friend of mine, who was saying that every time I see a nude brown body on screen, woman's body, I am afraid for that actress.
Why? Why?
Okay,
Like.
because her point is, does she know what kind of society we are in, and
Okay.
what sort of like economy that those images are going to circulate, and in what different ways they are going to circulate, and
Right.
what are people going to say. And she's like, immediately I feel afraid for that actress, no matter how much I like her or don't like her. Point being that the reason censorship as a body is so effective is not just because there are a lot of governmental controls in place or legal checks in place, is because it stays in our heads,
Hmm.
and it's very difficult to dislodge it from our heads. So there is a shock value of hearing certain swear words on screen which would have otherwise been beeped out, or which would,
Hmm.
but what really is the value of that lack of censorship? I mean, uh, what is really the political social value of that lack of censorship? That that lack of censorship, which actually has social political value, is not there uh, or is rather not there would be an extremely loose and irresponsible thing to say, but is certainly diluted
Right.
anyway, whichever platform we go to, because that is in our minds and that doesn't dislodge very easily.
So, to wrap up the session, I would like to ask you, how do you see the cinema viewing experience in the hindsight? Uh, do the big screen theater and the other screens coexist, and will we able to enjoy it in both the ways, or the OTT platforms will overpower maybe the big screen theaters, and people will choose to stay at home and at their own comfort space and watch the films, and how it will affect the filmmaking as well, like how, like you said, that we have this
Hmm.
romanticized notion about a big screen, or to watch a film like Bajirao Mastani at the theaters. So how
Yeah.
it will change, what do you think?
So I feel like at least the and again I'm basing what I'm saying on the conversations that I've had so far.
Hmm.
Uh, what I feel is it's a known fact that the death of cinema, so called, has been prophesized several times since its inception,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And through through all those prophecies, also cinema definitely zinda hi hai bhai.
Right.
And even theater band pad gaye, par cinema zinda hai. We have prophesized the death of cinema over and over again, and cinema has still survived.
Right.
And cinema, and by cinema has survived, I mean that in its like traditional incarnation, which is the theater, which is going to the movies, which is that entire experience of watching, going to the movies. Uh, so I think I don't see that going away in the foreseeable future, at least. Of course, I'm not. I'm hardly a. I don't know what is it that they call, one of those people who does tarot readings or has
Yeah.
seen the future.
Yeah.
But what I feel is going to change is the space that that experience occupies in our lives and the way that we look at that experience. That is certainly uh, uh, changing or might change, or if like the shift that we're looking at is the space that that experience has in our lives and the way in which we look at that experience.
Right.
Uh, that is definitely up for a change. So uh, I'm very interested in, like, for instance, how the physical book, having a physical book in your hand, has
Hmm.
become a different kind of statement about who you are, right? And it's very likely that I have said this in class several times, that
Hmm.
we often use a book to we put a book in the hands of the character and we presume that that is going to tell something about the character.
Right.
So but perhaps in a few years' time, the fact that the character is reading a physical book itself will say something about the character,
True.
uh, and not looking at a screen to read. So, why do I say that? Is because the space that books occupy in our lives will change, not that the book will go away. So, that's the same kind of change that I'm thinking we are in for, at least. Uh, uh, Given that we have not been going to the theaters, we are definitely going, once theaters open, we are definitely I'm very interested in seeing what kind of dynamic that's going to have in the minds of people, and therefore then what kind of change will happen.
Right.
So
So, ma'am, I'm just interested to know your definition of cinema with respect to all of this. Like you just said that you don't believe that the romanticization of cinema with respect to big
Mhm.
screen theater. So, what
so
is your
I
definition?
am not I think I'm the definitions make me very uncomfortable, uh, because I'm not much for pinning down the identity, because one thing can be multiple things at a time, like
Right.
can have multiple intersectional identities at a time. So I'm very uncomfortable with the word definition of cinema.
Okay.
But uh, but cinema is basically a shifting sort of construct that goes on in our heads, partially because for instance, when I was doing a series of interviews after Sacred Games released, and I was talking to audiences, and was asking them, what do you think it is? Is it cinema?
Hmm.
Is it television series? Is it, how would you categorize it? So many women I spoke to said cinema. Uh, that
Right.
is because they associate cinema with a certain, at least at that time, because Sacred Games was marketed as India's first Netflix original, right?
Yeah.
So at least at the time, uh, they associated that aesthetic with cinema. They didn't associate that aesthetic with television shows. So I think for me personally, uh, cinema is anything which uh, makes me want to live with the screen for a certain duration of time. Like, is a visual product that makes me want to live with the screen for a certain duration of time. So, this is when I say makes me want to live with, I come at this with an
Yeah.
academician's curiosity, or at least a student's curiosity. That even if it's a film that's not very good, or it's not taking me places or XYZ, but it still makes me want to live with the screen for a while until it's done.
Hmm.
So, uh, I wouldn't say it's a definition, but it's one of the factors that
Yeah.
sort of helps me decide this is cinema.
Okay. 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 So it was a good session, ma'am. I wanted to end up with a more. Actually, I can continue because I was interested to talk,
Yeah,
but we have to end it up. So yeah,
yeah.
thank you so much for giving your time, and I enjoyed it. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Avanti.
Yeah.
Uh,